Should students be required to stand and say the Pledge of Allegiance in class? Well, apparently one educator believes so and has gone as far as to say that if you do not stand and say the Pledge of Allegiance in class, you should go back to your own country. We're going to take a look at an article, and the headline reads, 8th grader who sat for Pledge of Allegiance says teacher told her to go back to her country. This was published on kbtx.com as well as a number of other news sources on March 1st, 2025. Now, we're going to get into this article, but before we do, I have a quick favor to ask. If you could please hit that like button, also subscribe to the channel so we can stay connected, and if you hit that notification bell, you'll always get notifications when I post a new video. That helps me out and supports the channel. Thank you very much in advance. Now let's talk about this article. This happened in Plymouth, Michigan, and the article reads, a Michigan middle school student claims she was racially discriminated against after choosing to remain seated for the Pledge of Allegiance. The Arab American Civil Rights League says the teacher told the 14-year-old that since she lives in the U.S. and enjoys its freedom, she should go back to her country if she didn't like it here. I was sobbing and I ran out of the room crying, Danielle Koloff said. The 8th grade student said it was a moment with her teacher at East Middle School in Plymouth that has made it an anxious experience for her. Now, come on. You got an 8th grader here and you're going to tell them to go back to their own country? Strong words. And in my opinion, inappropriate. All right. Regardless of your beliefs on this. Now, it goes on to say, she said it started January 10th when the Pledge of Allegiance started playing over school speakers. I decided I wanted to sit down because I didn't feel comfortable standing because of what's happening in Palestine. So there's some context for us. Danielle described, after the pledge was over, the teacher addressed the class and said that anyone that was sitting down was being very disrespectful. Danielle says after class she went to the teacher to explain why she was sitting, but she says the teacher spoke over her continuously. Since I enjoy the freedoms of the country and that I live here, I should either stand or go back to my country, the teen said the teacher ultimately told her. So I like that the context is provided here because you have a student who feels a certain way about the issues in Palestine. Now, that's not something I'm going to get into, but it does tell you that the student's not just being defiant just to be defiant, as some middle schoolers are, but that is entirely beside the point, because regardless of that, that's really not the issue here and what matters, in my opinion. Now, the article does go on to say that the student was put in a different class after this incident. The teacher admitted to saying this statement. The school has not made any kind of announcement or said what happened to this teacher, whether they were removed or disciplined in any way, but they did say that the school has implemented some restorative practices. It says, based on what Danielle is letting us know, is that the administration had restorative practice in the classroom with the teacher and the other students. But the only student who was not in the classroom was Danielle herself. So, yeah, because obviously I just mentioned she was removed from the classroom. She was put somewhere else. And it also says, according to the Arab American Civil Rights League, this is a direct violation of Danielle's First Amendment rights. And they've filed a formal complaint with the Michigan Department of Civil Rights. I think the teacher needs to be removed, Jacob Koloff said, her father. The Arab American Civil Rights League says if the school does not take what they consider to be the proper actions, they will file a lawsuit. Wow. Okay. So we could be looking at some legal action here, but does this really qualify? Can this actually happen? Because from what the article is telling us, the student refused to stand and did not stand. So I think, if they forced her to, then yes, maybe that's a violation of rights and a lawsuit and justification for a lawsuit. But I don't know. We'll find out. I'll stay caught up on this article. Now, One thing I want to talk about here is any Google search will tell you what the law says. And I typed it in here. I already knew what the answer was, but I'm just going to go over this for you. In 1943, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled on the case West Virginia State Board of Education versus Barnett. In this case, the Supreme Court ruled that school children cannot be forced to recite the Pledge of Allegiance, and that being allowed to decline to recite the pledge upholds these students' free speech rights. So this is what's being referenced here in the article as far as free speech is concerned. So, students do not have to stand and say the pledge at school. That is totally up to them. And to be honest, I didn't know this until recently. I looked this up after I read this article because I wanted to understand for myself. And so, quick story. Our school, coming back from winter break, or actually, winter holiday break, coming back in January, started making announcements. We hadn't had really the announcements for a lot of the year. And we started having an announcements thing that they started doing. And included in that was the Pledge of Allegiance. They started off saying the Pledge of Allegiance. And on the first day that they did this, it was kind of a shock. You know, we're like, okay, we'll stand and say the pledge. So students stood and said the pledge. And I displayed a American flag on my Promethean board because I don't have one in my classroom. And when that happened, after that, I told students my perspective on standing and saying the pledge. And I said, I want to tell y'all how I feel about this, because I do stand and say the pledge every morning. I said, when I was your age, and especially at the tail end of high school, I went through a bit of a rebellious stage, and I wasn't as patriotic as I am these days. And I felt pressured into saying the Pledge of Allegiance, and I almost felt like it was indoctrination and, like I was being forced to do something that I didn't want to do. But I explained to students that now, in my older years, I have realized the value and I have grown to love my country. And for me, it is a sign of respect and something that I enjoy and want to do, say the Pledge of Allegiance, because, I don't think that the rights that I have, I would have them in any other country or any other place in the world. And I respect the people who fought for our country. And, I went on this whole thing about why I say the pledge and how I used to not say the pledge. And then that next day, no students stood and said the Pledge of Allegiance. So I was the only one. And, students are kind of like, well, if I don't have to say the pledge, I'm not going to. I guess they didn't realize that they have the right to opt out. But I am a big believer in leading by example. And over time, as I have stood and said the pledge, I have heard more students, even though they don't stand, probably peer pressure because a lot of students don't stand. But I've heard some students reciting the Pledge of Allegiance with me as we go through it each morning. Whereas in the beginning, they didn't. So, that is my way of teaching, is to teach by example. And I never force my students to do those kinds of things. I was a student once and I know where they are. And so I try to respect that. And that's kind of the crux of the issue here is this whole thing about an educator saying that this 8th grader should go back to her home country. I mean, why would you do that? Why would you say something like that to a student? Why would you do that? That doesn't make any sense to me. And really, truly, it shows a lack of tolerance, a lack of acceptance. It shows a closed-minded attitude. And it is inappropriate. Should this teacher be removed from the school? I don't think so. I think that there's a discussion to be had, like, Maybe an email can be sent like, hey, you shouldn't say that to students. I really don't think this is warrants disciplinary action, but I think that teachers need to be aware of this. Like I said, this is my 5th year as an educator, and I didn't know the rule or the law about whether or not students are required to stand and say the pledge. And I can wager that a lot of teachers are not aware of this, that they don't necessarily know, but this is something that teachers should be educated on. Teachers should be told, because I think coming into the classroom, we overlook these kinds of things. We just assume that standing and saying the pledge is a requirement. And I've heard other teachers say this. I know other teachers that demand that their students stand and say the pledge. Students don't realize that they have the right to opt out, and teachers don't realize this either. And so I think that this is probably just an honest mistake, despite the inappropriate comment that the teachers made. I'm not trying to make excuses for that, but it is a mistake. And teachers should recognize or realize that students don't have to stand and say the Pledge of Allegiance. Now, I wish the student well, and I hope that everything turns out for Miss Danielle. Yeah. So that's all I have to say on this, but I am curious as to your thoughts, because you may disagree with the law and you may disagree with me. You may think that students should be required to stand and say the pledge, and you might be one of those teachers who does require your students to do that, taking advantage of their ignorance of the law. Now, let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. Also, if you like this content, make sure that you like the video, hit that subscribe button, also hit that notification bell. Thank you all for watching. That's all I have for you in this video, and I'll see you in the next one.